I'm joined by Kyle Petty and Parker Kligerman, and this week the NASCAR Hall of Fame announced the class of 2024. Jimmie Johnson, Chad Knaus being selected on the Modern Era ballot, Donnie Allison selected on the Pioneer Era ballot, and Janet Guthrie selected as the Landmark Award winner for outstanding contributions to NASCAR. So I'll ask you first, starting with you, Kyle. What did you think of the selections of all four?
Great selections. Great. You can't argue those selections. Donnie and what he meant to the sport. Donnie was the original crossover to IndyCar racing, and he held the record for the best Cup driver, best finish at Indy until Kurt Busch and some of those guys came along later, and Tony came over, obviously. But a guy that went the other way, phenomenal. When he drove for Banjo, when he drove for Hoss Ellington, when he drove for the Wood Brothers, that's great. And listen, you can't argue Chad Knaus and Jimmie Johnson. Jimmie Johnson's 5 championships in a row. I've said it a million times, and it falls on deaf ears as far as I know. It's the most underrated achievement in all of professional sports. I don't just say motorsports. I say all of professional sports. What those guys put together for that many years is absolutely, I don't think we'll ever see anything like that again. And Janet Guthrie, we know what her contributions were as she came along in the 70s in a sport that was basically a male-dominated sport. When even sponsor reps that were female couldn't get in the garage area, Janet Guthrie was out there driving a race car.
That's pretty amazing. Kyle, I'll leave the Donnie Allison and Janet Guthrie to you, because obviously a little bit before my time, and I love the history of the sport, but I won't say I'm the most educated all the way back there, so I'll leave that to you. But the Jimmie Johnson, Chad Knaus, as you put it, the 5 championships in a row being one of the greatest achievements in sports. And if you look at that, the era in which they did it, the formats that they did it in, that they had multiple different formats, they were able to win championships. And then also when you look at the competition level, never in the history of this sport was there a higher level of competition than you had at that era in terms of the funding around the sport, the enthusiasm around the sport, the viewership of the sport, and to be as dominant as they were, it was just unbelievable. And I think when I look at drivers over the course of the entirety of NASCAR, Jimmie Johnson, often people joke about saying he's the GOAT, the greatest of all time. I truly believe it, because to do what he did, what Chad Knaus and him did, and to go out there and win as many races as they did in that era, the competition level, and I just can't get over how many people were paying attention to the sport that time, and for them to just take hold of it and be dominant was so incredible that I always think when people joke about saying the GOAT, I'm like, no, that's not a joke. That's for real. He is the greatest of all time, in my opinion. And I'm not just saying that because I grew up watching him do all those things. It just, when I, now having been in the sport and knowing how hard it can be, that level of achievement, as you put it, I don't think it'll ever be matched in the future of NASCAR.
Well, speaking of that, then, on Jimmie Johnson, he was selected on 93% of the ballots, a very high total, but it certainly does mean that 4 of the 57 ballots that were submitted did not have his name on there. So it continues a streak. There's never been a unanimous selection in the NASCAR Hall of Fame for any member. So I'll start with you, Kyle, as a former voter. What do you think about the idea that Jimmie Johnson was not on every ballot this time?
Okay, so I don't have a problem with that. And let me tell you why. And let me. I will not argue. I will argue the GOAT comment. Since I'm Richard Petty's son, I will argue the GOAT comment because I don't believe in any sport there is a GOAT. Goats are like unicorns. They're just non-existent. I think for that era, he is the GOAT. I think Earnhardt was the GOAT. I think Richard Petty was the GOAT. I go back to Lee Petty and Joe Weatherly. They were GOATs. You know what I mean? So I think it just changes. But I'm going to say this, and I have read comments from media people, and it has been sad to me to read some of the comments that we should name the 4 that voted against Jimmie and then kick them off the board. When did we grow up to live in a world where if my opinion's one way and your opinion's something else, and I don't like you, I vote you off and you're off the island? That's it. It's either my way or the highway. And that's what we're saying by making those comments, by ridiculing 4 people who have an opinion, just like Parker Kligerman has an opinion of watching Jimmie Johnson and believes him to be the GOAT. I respect that opinion from Parker because that's who he saw race. I have to respect those 4 people for whatever reason that they saw fit that they didn't think that Jimmie should go in maybe ahead of Harry Hyde or Harry Gant or some of those guys. Who knows what their reasoning is? You know, when I walk into a presidential polling or presidential booth, I pull that lever and I vote my conscience. These people voted their conscience. We should not criticize these people. And I think that's the sad part for me. The sad part of this whole thing is not that Jimmie didn't get in unanimous. Jimmie is good with it. And listen, we'll never see anybody unanimous. If Jimmie Johnson didn't get in unanimous, I'm not going to see somebody in my lifetime. I just don't like the way we have taken the focus from celebrating Jimmie Johnson and Chad Knaus and Donnie Allison and these people being in the Hall of Fame to having a massive argument on Sirius Radio and in every form of media on why it wasn't unanimous. That is the craziest thing that I've ever run across in my life. We all have different opinions. We all have different driving styles. We all have different lifestyles. Don't criticize me. I won't criticize you. Don't throw rocks if you live in that glass house.
Well said, my man. I agree. I don't want to disrespect, obviously, what your dad accomplished and Dale Earnhardt and that sort of thing. That's why when I say that comment about the GOAT, it's because of the competition level of that era, right? And I think that's why you had the pushback and the blowback of not being unanimous, right? When people look at what Jimmie Johnson accomplished and the era in which he did it, you're saying, okay, can there possibly be a more competitive era that you would reel off 7 championships? No. Okay, that means he must be one of the greatest achievements in NASCAR, right? And so you'd think that would be unanimous. I agree with you. We should not be putting names out there and voting people off just because they have a different opinion. Now, I did troll a little bit on Twitter by saying show yourselves, but that was more me just messing around on Twitter and having some fun. I don't believe that should be the case. I agree. I do not think we should just be voting people off because they have a different opinion than what maybe popular opinion is, right? I think that's the point of having polls and voting and opinions, right? They're going to be different. And I think it shows, how competitive it is to get in the Hall of Fame, right? That shows how much thought people are putting into this voting. It's not just a group mentality. It's hey, I'm really paying attention. I think maybe they have whatever reasons they have, and whoever they are, they had a reason as to why they didn't believe Jimmie Johnson should be going in on this ballot, right? And so I just think that's part of the nature of this, and it shows that there is a lot of thought being put into it. And it's not just slide in because you had won 7 championships. There's still other accomplishments out there that people have in the sport that some felt like were maybe deserved being in the Hall of Fame earlier than Jimmie Johnson. So I have no problem with that. I do think though, if I was allowed to vote, I would have voted him in.
Thanks for joining us for Motormouths, presented by Toyota.
Hi, I'm Parker Kligerman. For more access like this from Pit Road, be sure to click and subscribe to the Motorsports on NBC YouTube channel.